PS1 style horror games have come up more and more often in recent years. Puppet Combo brought me into these horror games through Nun Massacre on the Switch, and I always love diving into them when I see something that's in that style. Today's game is not from Puppet Combo, though I thought it was when I first saw screenshots of it on the eShop. A horror game about tracking down a lost and kidnapped dog. Here is my review of CANINE for the Nintendo Switch. Do note that the presentation section will also have a comparison between Switch and Switch 2. The story of CANINE is about your dog being kidnapped and taken to the Umbral facility in a nearby area for experimentation. The plot is all about you infiltrating the facility in an attempt to rescue your captive doggo before it's too late. As a story, they throw what's really going on at you from the get-go as you find a book at the very start of the facility detailing the nature of the experiments these people perform on pets. No real mystery, just immediate, this is what they're doing. And it is rather interesting in what they're actually doing with trying to mess with the genetics of dogs to create some sort of higher being or creature. At least what little you actually get in the game. You only have 5 files to find for lore purposes, and there's not a huge amount of depth to it. Just really basic information about what they did and a computer you can find to show a few of the dogs that were experimented on. Now don't get me wrong, it's interesting and I really like the concept, but it really feels like just that, a concept. When it comes to gameplay, this is a first-person horror game with light puzzle elements. As you explore the facility, you'll walk around in first person, finding items needed to open doors and interact with doors and switches to progress forward. Speaking of main progression, the game is basically divided into 2 sections. At the start, you get this little short segment where you go into a few rooms of the facility and have to go get a locker key and fuse to turn on power until you gain access to the main hub area where the main game starts. Here, you have to go to different rooms that have cycling doors to be able to hit switches and collect keys in order to search for your dog and escape the facility. The wrench in this plan is that this is a Stalker game. You have a freakishly large dog monster walking around and looking for you, wanting to kill you. You don't get combat in this game, something that the game goes out of its way to show you as you find a bloody shotgun in the early sections, and the main character will come out and say, oh hey look, that's a shotgun. But I don't know how to shoot a gun and why would I need it anyways? The only thing you have available to you is a tennis ball. So you either hide somewhere, like underneath desks or stairs until the monster passes you by, or you can toss the tennis ball to distract him. Because after all, even a freakishly huge mutated dog abomination is still a doggo deep down inside and loves to play with tennis balls. The goal of this game is to avoid the monster while searching for keys and switches to open up the exit. This actually isn't really that hard, as the game is a little kind with checkpoints whenever you flip each of the 3 switches. So if you don't hide in time and are killed, you can restart when the last switch was flipped and give you a chance to get away and keep going. It also helps that this monster is a very slow Stalker villain. When he gets close, he will speed up and mad dash to kill you, but until he does, he walks very slowly. More of an atmospheric villain where you listen for his loud footsteps to know if you're safe or not. And before we dive into the negatives and my nitpicks of the game, let me say that I love the scare factor here. This is something CANINE does really, really well. With its very low and quiet music, it's really creepy even before the Stalker shows up, having visuals like that creepy dog painting in one of the first hallways that looks like it's staring right at you as you walk down the hall. It's also packed with scripted scares, and they do the Puppet Combo method of audio shift jump scares. The loud sound cue when you first see the Stalker walking in a faraway hall is incredibly creepy and gave me goosebumps. The same happens with the way the Stalker works, with the sound changing depending on how far he is as he patrols the facility. Even when you're hiding, you can hear the footsteps and music slowly increase in volume the closer he gets. But there are some nitpicks to be said here. There's a really good concept in this game, but there isn't enough of it. Earlier, I mentioned there's a hallway and then a hub that connects to several small rooms for switches, and that's literally literally the entire game. You just go in to find the hub, flip through the 3 switches, and try to escape. And that brings us to content and length as well, which is very short. I spent around 40 minutes before I completed the game for the first time. On the plus side, the game does have multiple endings and a hardcore mode you can unlock for finishing the game with a good enough rank, but even with that, you probably won't be spending more than 1 to 2 hours for 100%ing the entire game on both difficulties. Moving on to presentation, the game looks good for what it's trying to do. It's mimicking the PS1 style games, while environments often do admittedly have smoother edges on them than actual PS1 games would. There are also static and CRT style effects in the game, though they're pretty light, and many logos and pictures that have that older PS1 blur. The problem with this game is performance. First, let's compare Switch 1 and Switch 2. When you initially boot the game up at the beginning, Switch 1 runs at a shaky 30 FPS in the first few sections when you're exploring the entrance to the facility. On Switch 2, this section will run at 60 FPS, offering a much smoother experience. But neither of these will stay that way. Once you get inside and get into the bathroom, the Switch 1's frame rate tanks to really bad levels when moving the camera easily beneath 20 FPS. This also happens in other rooms early on, like the computer room with the fuse puzzle. And when you get to the main hub and puzzle rooms, it gets even worse. That low frame rate is there constantly and continually in the entire hub and rooms where you're supposed to avoid the Stalker and hit switches. I very rarely saw frame rates even close to 30 FPS from the hub all the way to the end. This is considerably better on Switch 2, but it's not perfect. When you first get to the bathroom on Switch 2, it goes down from the normal 60 FPS to around 30. It'll also drop down to 30 FPS pretty frequently in the hub and puzzle rooms, often jumping back and forth between 30 and 60 depending on where you are. Now the interesting thing here is this only happens in docked mode on Switch 2. If you play in handheld mode, the frame rate will drop a bit beneath 60, but nowhere near 30. Though it is worth noting that this method of using handheld mode does not work for better performance on Switch 1. Looking at all of this, it's a PS1 style horror game. It's definitely an optimization problem that they might be able to fix, but with it in the current state that it's in, it probably should have just been a Switch 2 game, at least until they learned how to optimize it a little better for Switch 1. It's still not great on Switch 2 with all the drops to 30 FPS, but it's much more playable when it's not constantly dropping into the 20s and below. That's all I have for performance, so let's go into battery life. On the original and light models, CANINE gets a battery range of about 2 to 3.5 hours. The V2 and OLED models get 5.5 to 7 hours, and the Switch 2 gets about 3 hours. In conclusion, CANINE is an interesting little horror game about dogs being experimented on and being stalked by a giant dog monster. Now, the downside, the game is more of a concept than a full game with its incredibly small amount of content, and the performance is not well optimized at all. Having the Switch 1 occasionally run at a frame rate above 20 and Switch 2 having a lot of jumping between 30 and 60. I did enjoy my time with the game. It's a really cool concept, but it's a hard press to call it any more than just that. Reviews to Go rates CANINE for the Nintendo Switch and Switch 2 a 6 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching and have a great day.